you're just off a trip from Antarctica, from what I've seen on
Yeah,
your
yeah, that
Facebook
was
and all of that.
yeah, that was pretty magic, I have to say. It was I
You
was
stopped
turning the
shivering.
big I turned the big half century last year. And so it's partly to sort of celebrate that and partly to do some stories as well. So yeah, we had an amazing time. I'm actually been writing stories today, in fact, so it's very much kind of top of mind.
Right.
But yeah, it was really magical and lovely to get down there and had about a week there and a couple of weeks in Argentina and some other stuff around that. So
Oh wow,
apart from missing the
superb.
dog and it was great to avoid Christmas, I have to say. I mean, I
Oh
love Christmas,
really?
but yeah,
Yeah,
just not to have to kind
yeah.
of
All the nutty stuff about Christmas. Yeah. All right. Well,
yeah,
let me do a quick intro, mate, so that people listening
sure.
in know who you are and what you're about.
Sure.
So this is Chris Dwyer. Chris and I go back. Well, it's been must have been a year, 12 or 13 years since we last saw each other back in Hong Kong,
Yeah.
where Chris used to be the communications director for CNN.
Yeah.
Don't know if I've got the title right, but something like that. You're in charge of the corporate communications team,
Yeah.
and then jumped ship to become a freelance food and travel writer.
That's right.
Got lots of big names under his belt, such as CNN, Travel and Leisure, BBC Travel, as well as the South China Morning Post and Rob Report and CNBC, among others. Um, but that's kind of that's it. You basically I found it really interesting. I really wanted to talk to you because most people go from journalism into comms
Yeah.
because the money's better, or
Yeah.
go from freelance into full time because it's more secure. But you've kind of
Yeah.
flipped it about.
Yeah.
So what was the thinking there? Was that just kind of tired of the corporate machine after nearly 15 odd years or whatever and needed a break?
Yeah, that's exactly it, James. It was look, it was a brilliant experience in a fabulous company with very smart people, very smart, brave, committed journalists, and I was very proud to have worked there. But it was yeah, it was about 14 years by the time I made the decision that I wanted a bit of a break. Doing comms for a news network, and obviously, you know very well CNN how it works. It's pretty full on, it's pretty intense, it's pretty unrelenting.
Mm.
Uh, and it reached a point where I just decided I needed a little bit of time for myself. And also in all candor, I mean, it's a long time ago now, but I can say this in all candor. I wasn't very good at the politics, at the kind
Mm.
of the corporate politics. And at the time, I was vice president of communications for CNN, but also for Turner Broadcasting, the parent company. And so it was a big, substantial kind of position, which yeah, which took a lot. And it just reached a
Mm.
point. But you know what? I'm going to have a little bit of a break. And a lot of people told me I was crazy. A lot of people said, "You're nuts. Why are you doing this?" But it just felt like the right thing to do. And I've always kind of gone on my instincts, I guess.
Mm.
Yeah, and
Well,
it's funny how
that longer stint is not only in one kind of career, but in one company. I
mm,
guess after a while, that's maybe it felt a bit tired and
yeah, there's a little bit of that. I mean, you'll know
mm,
as well. There's always the sort of joke about knowing that another US election is coming around, and once you've done sort of three cycles of US elections, you
mm,
hit another one, you've got to kind of you realize that it's been another 4 years. But yeah, I mean,
right.
it's certainly. I mean, I still love news and I still love the current affairs agenda, and I still watch CNN and all the rest of it, of course. But it felt like it had run its kind of natural course, and it felt like a good time to take a bit of a pause. At no point, I think it's important to stress, mate, that at no point did I think I'm leaving this and I'm going to become a writer. That
Right.
absolutely wasn't the thinking. It was purely, I want to take a little bit of time out. And in fact, it was my darling wife who suggested, slightly tongue in cheek. She said, "Well, you love, I'd been sitting around for a couple of months enjoying life and doing a bit of travel, but not really doing that much." And she said, "Well, you love food and dining and restaurants, and you love writing. So why don't you start a food blog?" And I said, "Well, listen, I am 20 years older and about 15 stone heavier than any other food writer or food blogger." And she said, "Exactly. That's exactly why you need to do it because you kind of know what you're talking about," which is very generous of her. But off the back of that, I did start a blog just for a bit of fun. And, the creative process again actually got me writing quite regularly. And then to my astonishment, it kind of, it got a little bit popular, as popular as these things can get in
And so
2014.
was this just writing about Hong Kong restaurants and cuisine at that point, or were you using travels all over Asia?
Yes, mate. Initially, it was just kind of Hong Kong, and
Hmm.
then of course I was on the road quite a lot anyway for personal travel, and then I started putting a few pieces in here and there, and then subsequently off the back of that, someone reached out to me from a Hong Kong sort of online food magazine and said, "Would you like to write a piece?" And I said, "Sure." And then that was the sort of catalyst of me thinking, well, maybe I can actually make something of this, and it morphed much more into sort of travel writing ultimately.
Mm.
But yeah,
So
I
that
just
so that was
really
a paid piece that somebody saw your blog and offered you a
correct.
paid rate
Correct.
for an
Yeah,
article,
exactly.
right? Mm.
Exactly. So that was the kind of genesis of it. And of course, it helped greatly that, I knew people, in some of the media organizations. So I wasn't pitching kind of completely blind, which is, of course, one of the biggest challenges, I think, for most,
Mm.
particularly young writers today, is just shouting into that kind of void and that ether it can feel like sometimes. So that helped and that, got me a few more commissions. And then it just kind of snowballed really, really nicely. Um, I think it's important to say as well that, I've absolutely loved doing it. I feel incredibly blessed to have done this, for a decade now. But at the same time, practically, it is difficult, very difficult to make a living doing it. And so,
Hmm.
whilst doing this, I've also spent 10 years working with sort of corporate clients and doing
Yeah.
copywriting, as we all do,
Hmm.
So I think
So
it's
that
important
that
to
that
throw
kind
that.
of pays the bills and allows you the
Yeah,
freedom to then write about what you want in the
exactly
other
right.
time. Yeah.
100%.
Great.
Yeah, exactly. So,
We'll get onto that in a second, but I do want to ask, 'cause so you started as a blogger, but I was looking at your site just now, and I don't see any of your own blog posts on there. All I see is kind of paid outlet. So
yeah, yeah.
have you kind of abandoned the blogging now, and all you do is paid work?
Oh no, no, goodness. Yeah, I mean the blog, which was the wonderfully named Fine Food Dude,
All right.
which was slightly cringy now, but at the time it seemed like a great idea. But no, that my goodness, that shut it in maybe 2017 or 18, so maybe 3 or 4 years. And then
Hmm.
obviously, if I'm getting paid to write, I'm not going to spend my time doing stuff for my blog. So I just kind of so that shuttered, and someone else is probably now got the
Is now
URL.
there's a younger, slimmer fine food dude running around the world.
There's a
Yeah.
younger, thinner, hairier me somewhere.
Yeah, maybe. Well, you never know. You should check it out. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's interesting because I think, we've been talking in the group about kind of blogging being another dimension to travel writing that can be monetized. And, there's some very successful travel bloggers out there.
Yeah.
But it does take a lot of time, I guess. Did you find when you were doing the blogging, it was hard work to come up with the ideas or run around and because it was always kind of like a one-man show, I suppose, when you're doing the blogging. Whereas when you're writing journalism, you've got PR people to help out and other
Yeah.
marketing communications people to help. So, what's your kind of view of the differences in comparison there?
It's a good point. I mean, I guess the point with the blogging that I was doing was that it was all pretty local to Hong Kong, most of it, and it was all driven by my agenda of what I like to write about. So I was quite lucky in as much that I was just cherry picking stuff which I thought was interesting, I thought was kind of compelling, and stuff which would allow me to learn along the way as well. And yeah, I mean, to be, it's true that I didn't have any kind of initial contact with PR agencies or any of that kind of thing, but that came in time, and you know, I wrote a couple of stories and a couple of PRs noticed it, and they got in touch, and then that kind of hamster wheel starts a little bit.
Mm,
Again, I think having been on the PR side myself for so long, I think I had I think it's definitely been a benefit to me to have really understood that side of the coin, that side of the equation, as it were. And that's still still the case to this day that it's really useful to understand how PRs work and what they need and all that kind of stuff, which is I'm not saying it's overlooked, but I think sometimes it's easy to forget that they're a key part of a lot of writing.
mm. So I mean, give us a little bit of insight there because I think that's one of the things that you can probably shed a bit of light on both sides of that desk.
Mm,
So do you, okay, you've mentioned there how PRs will get in touch with you if they see something that you've written and you
yeah.
maybe can be a fit for their clients. But is it more difficult for new writers, for example, to do that? I mean, presumably PR clients would like to work with a more established writer who's got lots of bylines everywhere and has connections with editors and all that sort of thing. So how does that kind of whole thing work? And what should a writer know about the PR mindset in order to
Mm.
develop and establish those relationships?
It's a good question. I think the key thing about PR is understanding how they work and understanding what they need first. And of course, if you're going in blind, you don't have any bylines, you don't have any kind of portfolio that you can share, it's a difficult pitch, let's be honest, and the
Mm,
chances of actually getting anything back is kind of, it's not the easiest, but as in anything in life, I think if you can make that connection personally somehow, be it at an event, just be it through Instagram, be it through, kind of old school understanding the agency, understanding who they work with, the sort of stories that they want covered. You may be able to fill a niche for a story which they want covered, which no one else has done. So it doesn't matter if it's on your blog because at least it's getting out there. It's really a question of kind of developing that relationship and understanding as much as possible what they need and how you can help them out. And then it becomes that quid pro quo. But yeah, I'm under no illusions, or no writer should be under any illusions that it's an easy kind of process to get in there, particularly when so much content these days is obviously influencer driven, and as a blogger or kind of an informal writer, it's tougher, but it's still very doable, and it's about
mhm.
persistence, about tenacity, and it's about kind of making those relationships and keeping them in place as much as possible.
So, in terms of what a PR does want, though, I mean, presumably, if somebody got in touch with a PR person and said, "I just want some information or a press release about this," they would have no issue in emailing you a press release. But are you talking about something a little bit beyond that? You're talking about fam trips or junkets, that sort of thing, in order to get
Mm.
invited onto those. You need kind of more of a relationship that's been established, or you need
Yeah.
presumably a confirmed assignment from a title that they'd be interested in getting into.
Yeah, I've always worked on the basis that for any kind of, assignment or any kind of trip that, the quid pro quo is that you need confirmed coverage in advance. It surprised me when I started writing that I'd go on press trips. I don't really do press trips anymore, but when I did, I'd be surprised that most of the other journalists had no commissions. And it's a question of them experiencing it and then going out and selling the story, which is kind of
Mm-hmm.
interesting. But, I think it may be a little bit different in Asia Pacific, the way it works as well. Slightly different dynamic in that part of the world, that it's actually about, you know, having the experience and then writing about it subsequently.
Hmm.
Uh, but the relationship with, with the PRs is always, ultimately it's driven by the sort of content which you can deliver them. And, it is again, it is a quid pro quo. And there are times when I've done trips and I've wondered, why am I kind of here? Why am I doing this? But it takes a while for those offers to come in. And again, to your point, of course, any PR is going to help you out if you want press release, images, bios, all that
Hmm.
kind of stuff. For the more kind of substantial investments financially from their perspective, yes, it is about, getting that coverage and, getting kind of titles, which is going to move the needle from their perspective, I guess.
Sure. And just help me out with one little subtle difference, because I've sometimes got the impression that yes, of course, PRs like to see their clients in the articles that go up on CNN or BBC or wherever it might be. But is there something about the PR world where it's also important for them just to be seen to be doing the work and making that effort for their clients, whether it actually results in a confirmed story or not? Sometimes I've got that impression. I might be wrong in that they
Yeah.
don't actually care about the end result on the pages of the BBC or the SCMP or whatever it is, but
Yeah.
there's the effort that goes into it that's also valuable in some way.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think, as in any business and industry, there's a lot of kind of background stuff and behind the scenes stuff, which people want to be validated and they want to be respected for doing that. But I also think practically that if you're an agency, your bread and butter is delivering some sort of clippings book at the end of the
Hmm.
week, at the end of the month. And I mean, to your point as well, I mean, the sort of relationship management piece, that's something which won't necessarily result in coverage, for example. But if you can develop a relationship with a writer or with some sort of other stakeholder, that's invaluable. And that may
Mm.
be business to the brand later down the line. It may not necessarily say, here's a piece of coverage, look at my story. But generally, yeah, I tend to think that most PRs that I work with will want to show the coverage and be proud of showing it as well sometimes. If you work
Hmm.
on something with somebody, for example, this Antarctica trip I've just been on with Silversea has been remarkable. And that's
And
been
that wasn't a press trip, are you saying?
no,
Or
that was, I mean, the Antarctica leg was a press trip,
right.
the Argentina thing. So things like I flew myself there and, so various elements I took care of. We were in Argentina first as well. But yeah,
Hmm.
Silver Sea, this is a substantially expensive experience.
Yeah.
The point is that I started having these conversations more than a year before the trip,
Right.
just because it's a very long-term thing. It's a long burn. And for that, of course, I've gone all out to really kind of maximize the sort of coverage and get
Mm.
as many articles as possible.
And so you had a lot of commissions or a lot of agreements or discussions with editors prior to the trip, then
Oh
basically.
yeah, I
Mm.
had three pieces confirmed prior, and I've got two since. So yeah, I mean
Okay.
that's. But I'm a little bit unusual to that extent, James. I think in that I always want to under promise and then over deliver, and I
Hmm.
have press trips with writers who shall remain nameless who perhaps talk something up and then ultimately they didn't deliver any content at all, which puts the PR in
Hmm.
a really difficult position. And I can understand there's circumstances why that happens, and I've had stories spiked, and things happen which are out of your control. But yeah, ultimately it was driven, of course, by saying, look, here's a nice piece in X, Y, or Z, and it's a win for them. And
And did you have to agree with the Silver Seas PR, like the number of articles then, or is there any kind of quantitative measure that they have to see in order to agree with that, or is it a little bit
no,
more
it's a, it's a,
fluid?
it's a, it's a good question, but no, certainly not in that case. That was working with Finn Partners, who's an agency who's based in
Hmm.
Hong Kong and in London and elsewhere. I mean, a global agency. But at no point did they say we need three pieces with X circulation or whatever. I think, again, that's predicated on the trust which has developed over the years. I've done multiple stories with them as an agency, so they hopefully know that I'm always going to deliver as much as possible. Um, but yeah, I mean, certainly for some, for some commissions and for some press trips, I'm sure they'd say, we want a substantial, respected international title or international platform, or
Mm.
I mean, if I pitched it and said I've got the front page in the Ascot Advertiser, they'd probably be a little bit underwhelmed. You know,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
uh, it's all relative, I suppose.
Well, I mean, I have had some PRs actually being quite detailed about, we want this number of pages and this sort of thing and this number of words. And, I think sometimes it depends who you're dealing with, maybe they can
Yeah,
get pretty precise. And I don't know if that comes from client discussions or whether it's just
right.
something that they want to see.
Yeah,
But it
that's
varies.
interesting. Yeah, I have
Yeah.
had about that in the past as well, and it's got to be a standalone feature. You can't mention other
Mm,
competitors in it. That I kind of understand as well. But and again, it's funny the amount of times where actually having a print version of a story. I mean, again, it could be in the Ascot Weekly,
mm,
but if it's in print, it's gold.
yeah.
Thing about that tangible, experiential connection with the story, which really PRs love, and of course clients love as well, because everyone can send a link and everyone can, you know,
How do you explain that though? Because it doesn't make much sense, does it, really,
no,
in the sense
it's
that
completely counterintuitive.
online is going to reach far more people and
Yeah,
it's going to be far more shareable. And
yeah,
but there's something about the old-fashioned magazine, the glossy, that
yeah,
even for advertisers as well these days, I guess
yeah.
it's kind of all bundled up together, isn't it? It's
100%. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, maybe that will change as the sort of, the business decision makers in the company get younger as well, and
Mm, hmm.
are all digital natives, I'm like myself. So yeah, but it's an interesting kind of, and also there are, of course, certain titles which we know which PR agencies love, which perhaps a lot of people don't really know much about, but within the luxury sphere or whatever, they've seen as having a very good reputation, so they'd be delighted to get coverage in them, even though it's not the sort of thing you'd ever really see on the shelves of an airport shop or whatever that may be. So
Can you name some of those? I mean, I'm thinking of maybe
yeah,
Rob Report and
exactly.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Uh-huh.
Rob Report is the one which kind of jumps out to me, and
Yeah.
there's others out there, but yeah, for some reason PRs are all about Rob Report. So
Right. Well, I guess Robert does a very good job of marketing itself as the tastemaker's tastemaker, doesn't it? As being the super uber luxury title of the world kind of thing.
yeah,
So maybe it all kind of fits together.
yeah, no, for
Um,
sure, sure.
but let's get into okay. So I very much doubt you're going to come back from a a comp trip to Antarctica on a Silver Seas cruise and have anything kind of negative to say.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a very easy job to write the kind of the glowing pieces that the PR and
Right.
the client is going to want to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
Sometimes, though, that doesn't always happen that way around, does it? Sometimes you go somewhere, you're a little bit disappointed or
Mm.
something goes wrong.
Yeah.
Have you ever had to deal with that? And how do you deal with that when it's come through a press agent?
Yeah. I mean, so firstly, to your point on Silver Sea, that's a fair point, but I also want to say it's important that I was very clear from the word go that I wasn't going to sugarcoat in my stories environmental impact of the sort of trip which I was
Right.
undertaking. And I immediately went from said I need to know the carbon offsetting, I need to know the sort of impact reports and all that kind of stuff. So it's not, it's not kind of it's not a puff piece just saying this is the greatest experience you'll ever have and forget the rest. So it was,
And will some of that data go into your
absolutely,
articles as
100%.
well? Right.
100%. Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm.
Again, in fact, that's what I've been kind of working on today.
Okay.
So yeah, so from that perspective, yeah, you've got to tell it like it is. And again, this is a very special, very delicate ecosystem in place. And it's a privilege to be there, but at the same time, it comes at a cost. So, as far as other experiences have gone, yeah, I mean, there have been trips in the past which have been, either hugely underwhelming or really badly organized. And, there have been a couple of examples where, the coverage in question didn't materialize because the experience wasn't quite what was expected. Sometimes, of course, editors can be a little bit capricious, understandably, and change their mind on things or change the sort of angle they want on the story. And so therefore you have to sort of say, listen, sorry, but it's not going to work out. So as far as kind of, I haven't had touch wood too many sort of disastrous experiences on trips. I mean, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head if anything kind of
How,
jumps
how,
out.
how do you think you would deal with it? Do you think you would write up a piece and be kind of critical of the experience, or do you think I know that some writers decide
Mm.
they're just not going to write something rather than put out a negative piece, they'll just kind of take the neutral ground and not do anything
Mm.
at all, basically.
No, I wouldn't. Again, I wouldn't. I think maybe it's the years at CNN is that you've got to kind of tell it like it is to a point.
Hmm.
And I'm not gonna, do a hatchet job on a property or a restaurant or an experience, a complete kind of takedown. But at the same time, if it doesn't reach those kind of levels expected, you've got to say that because you're
Mm.
doing a disservice to your readers. And I think that's particularly true when it comes to, restaurants as well. And I do a lot of restaurant reviews, lots of kind of chef interviews and that kind of thing. And you've got to be clear because it's not in the best interest of the chef or the restaurant if you say something was life-changing and actually it was pretty mediocre
Mm.
because they need to know because sometimes they're so embroiled and involved in it they're not actually that close to what ends up on the plate or the experience that is served up.
Mm.
uh, so yeah, it's a balancing act, isn't it? But it's you've got to be you've got to kind of stay true to your kind of your morals, I guess, as much as possible. But again, it's yeah, it's a quid pro quo. So
Sure, no, for sure. And I mean, you mentioned kind of restaurants there. We haven't obviously Antarctica is a travel piece, but you do fewer travel pieces actually than food pieces now, I guess. Although food and travel are so inextricably entwined, wherever you go, it's kind of
yeah.
a huge part of the travel experience. So how do you decide what experience or what trip or what review you're going to do next? Are these things coming from PRs and you're kind of sorting through a rotor, a little
Hmm.
rotary of things coming from PRs, or do you kind of take that onus on yourself and do some research to figure out what's worth covering next?
It's a good question. It's a bit of both, is the truth. So,
Hmm.
I will kind of start the year and I'll look ahead, and there will be certain events during the year which I tend to go to and tend to cover. So, for example, world's 50 best restaurants, I tend to do those wherever they are. Again, I fly myself to those. I'm not subsidized for those. I pay for my own hotels. But often off the back of that and off the back of being somewhere, I'll say, well, I'm going to be in this part of the world. Let me speak to X, Y, and Z and see what a sort of stories are around there. So case in point, I'm going to Abu Dhabi next week for Middle East's 50 best restaurants. And then off the back of that, I'm thinking, well, I'm going to be in the region. There's a couple of places I'd like to check out and a couple of restaurants I'd like to check out. So there's that kind of thing, which is, driven by the kind of events and the experiences. Some of it can be quite, ad hoc and quite surprising that I'll get an email or a WhatsApp out of the blue and say, we've had a place come up on X, Y, or Z. Would you be interested in covering it? I have to be, of course, as we all do, very mindful of my wife and our situation
Mhm.
here. And constantly kind of getting up and disappearing isn't necessarily the smartest move for marriage or for multiple reasons. So that's always a key factor as well. I'm lucky in as much that my wife runs her own business, so can frequently travel with me, which is really nice
Mm.
as well. But yeah, but sometimes it will be, completely unexpected that I'll be on a personal holiday somewhere and experience something and then think, hang on, this is remarkable. I've not experienced this before, seen this before. And then off the back of that, there may be a story which develops. And
Mm.
yeah, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, places I've been for personal trips, which have then become a kind of a really good source of content. So Tasmania, for example,
Okay.
went on holiday, and then from a food writing perspective, extraordinary.
Mm.
Georgia, I mean, what a beautiful country. And again, some of the best food I've ever had in the world. Didn't expect to be writing about that. So there's a little bit of kind of happy serendipity along there as well.
Mm. I remember I actually did one of the very few pieces I've ever written about food was a few years ago, but I don't know if you remember, I tapped you. It was my kind of piece looking at asking kind of food celebs, ranging in
Mm.
stature, but for once in a lifetime meals. And I think you
Oh yeah,
mentioned a meal you'd had in the Philippines a few months before you got married with your
that's
wife, and
right.
just everything kind of came together beautifully
Yeah,
to create this thing that you don't think would ever be repeated, even if you tried, kind of thing, because it
yeah,
was quite serendipitous and
absolutely.
circumstantial.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah, that was at Antonio's, a restaurant, and it was just a perfect symbiosis of, of everything that you'd want in a meal. So yeah, no, I
yeah.
remember the piece, absolutely. Yeah.
But in terms of the food writing, have you always been kind of a foodie and this is a natural gravitation, or was it something that started out when you started writing more regularly for your blog and that sort of thing, and it kind
Mm,
of came from there, or is it more
mm.
kind of evergreen and lifelong?
I mean, look, as the youngest of six kids, I think I've always been a greedy bastard because I think you kind of have to be, no, no, in all
Survival
seriousness.
of the fittest, yeah.
Well, exactly, yeah. No, I've always loved the experience of food. I've always enjoyed sort of cooking to a point. Um, I'll be entirely frank that until I moved to Hong Kong, I barely ate out in restaurants. I simply didn't have the money to do so, particularly not living
Mm,
in London, in the early 2000s. So it's not like I was going to Petrus or Gordon Ramsay, 25 years ago. I mean, far from it. But I think it was really Hong Kong which kind of lit that fire in me. And because it's such a massively different cultural and culinary landscape and so vibrant and so unexpected and so educational, I mean, just on so many levels. And you'll know this better than anyone as well, just that daily cultural difference. And even after 15 years there, I'd be going to work or going to wherever, and you'd see something and it just kind of stick with you. And often it was kind of food related.
mm,
Uh, and then, discovering Asia, again, a part of the world I knew almost nothing about, such an incredible, rich tapestry of places to go and things to eat. And so that was really the kind of catalyst for me, involving myself more in food and then just thinking that this is something I'm really, passionate about. And then ultimately for me, it is the ultimate lens on a destination. And it's
mm,
the old cliche, but it's true. The best way to experience any place, I think, when you turn up is to go to the food market.
mm,
There, you get the most authentic. I mean, yeah, again, a massively overused word, but
mm.
you do get the quote unquote most authentic kind of taste for a place. And I still think that's largely true to this day. I mean, again, would you go to Sainsbury's here? Maybe not the same sort of impact, but it's that kind of yeah,
You've made it tougher for yourself moving back to kind of rainy Blighty, haven't you? Especially to do the exotic food blog or whatever it is, your
yeah,
exotic food
yeah,
writing you like to do. I mean, what
yeah.
amazes me, or what I don't know, it doesn't surprise me anymore because I found this out ages ago, but how many people love reading about food as well, not just writing about and experiencing it, but a lot of the food stuff that gets done on CNN Go or CNN Travel, BBC
Mm.
Travel, some of the most popular stories. I
Oh yeah,
remember my most popular or the most clicked story I ever did at CNN was the world's 50 most delicious foods.
yeah,
And there's something about food, isn't it, that people feel really connected to. It's a kind of a cultural identity
yeah,
thing. And
yeah.
if you can get it right, if you can really stoke those, opinion flames about whether this
Yeah.
food is good or bad or whatever. You've kind of got a mini winner on your hands almost by default, haven't you? It's
Yes, I completely
interesting.
agree. Yeah, it really is. It's fascinating. And you're absolutely right because it stirs that kind of, I mean, let's be honest, it's that kind of, pride slash, almost nationalist fervor because there
Hmm.
have been stories which are run on CNN on the past, the world's 25 best soups and
Hmm.
God forbid that, pho beats, I don't know,
Yeah.
French onion soup or whatever. It becomes an international incident. And certainly from my time at CNN over the years, I remember years ago, there was a story. I'm trying to think where it was. I think it was Taiwan or somewhere. And someone did a story which was kind of jokey, tongue in cheek about some food being disgusting
Oh
or taste.
yeah.
Maybe
Now
it was
this
steamed
was it
tofu or
was.
something
Do,
like
do
that.
you remember we had it was that user generated thing that was going on
Oh,
at
I
CNN at the
report.
time. I report,
Yeah.
and we got kind of 7 or 8 people to put to the most disgusting foods. And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, Taiwan got really upset about
That's
century
right.
egg being
Yeah, that was
included.
it. Exactly
And I think
right.
Demaria had to go over and like do an ambassadorial visit and all sorts of things
Yeah.
to try and calm things down, didn't he? So
I mean, that's exactly right. So yeah, it becomes a kind of an international political incident and kind of the passion it kind of fires up in people is quite something, isn't it?
and
So
and and is that something that's on your mind when you're writing, as in not wanting to kind of offend people or tread on toes and all that sort of stuff? I mean, it doesn't sound like it would be. I think if you love food, you're going to kind of enjoy or at least indulge in the experience, whatever's kind of happening. But it's not something that you're kind of wary of when you're having an experience
no,
or writing.
no, really, that's not something I've ever really kind of considered because ultimately I'm very open-minded about food and I like pretty much everything. There's been a few foods over the years which I wouldn't necessarily go back to if
Mm.
out of choice, but and some stuff has been decidedly unpleasant, but that's just the way of the world, and it's always going to be subjective at the best of times, isn't it?
Mhm.
But as long as you're not kind of insensitive or kind of culturally inappropriate, then sure, I don't think people have got a problem with saying you don't like something or something, smells a bit
Sure.
rank. Or,
Well, I mean, yeah, stinky tofu. I think you can, and you're not allowed to open durians in hotels in Vietnam and that sort of thing, are
exactly,
you? So it's
exactly right.
yeah,
So
there are there.
case in point as well. But
Just follow the
I did a
rules.
I did a story for CNN a few years ago at a food conference in Manila called Madrid Manila Fusion, which brought together Spanish chefs and Filipino chefs. And when the story was subbed, they took out the fact that one of the delicacies was whale sperm, which was, unusual,
Hmm.
but it's, I mean, in Japanese cuisine, of course, shirako is kind of generally cod sperm, and that's a very sought after delicacy. But, I think the headline was, is whale sperm the next quinoa or something? But,
Right.
there are ways and means to kind of, to top and tail a story as
Yeah.
well. I think, maybe somebody in
But
the Japanese Whale Sperm Association would have been appalled at that. But,
yeah. Well, very clickable, very clickable. So
well, exactly right. You see, that's the
but
point.
we're gonna kind of run out of time in a few minutes, Chris. But I just wanted to touch on something else. So you've mentioned there how often you kind of pay for your own flights and accommodation and this sort of thing,
Hmm.
and that probably eats up a lot of what you earn over
Yeah.
the course of your actual freelance writing.
Yeah.
So in order to kind of subsidize that, you've got this consultancy stuff going on the
Right.
side. So how much of your time does that take up, and how do you fit that in? And are there any kind of conflicts there that sometimes arise when you're writing? Or do you ever
Hmm.
write for a client that you're doing consulting for and that sort of thing? And how does that kind of work come about?
Sure. Sure. I would say probably 40% of my time is taken up doing the kind of sort of consultancy stuff. And the rest would be not even writing. I mean, again, the score.
Mm,
It's the hustle, and
yeah.
it's the logistics, and it's the chasing, and it's the being ghosted, and it's the admin, and it's remembering that you don't work for anyone other than yourself. So when your printer runs out of paper or ink, you can't call IT and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I would say probably around 40% is taken up with that, and the rest is all the kind of other bits and bobs. And also things like Instagram. I mean, Instagram, I deliberately haven't done anything on Instagram for about 10 days now, just because I did it, non-stop when I was away. But that really eats
Mm.
into my day sometimes. I'm not complaining about it. I'm just saying it's a necessary kind of, aspect of what I do. And
That's
as
necessary because you are building your own brand, or because PRs and brands expect to see a little bit of coverage if you've gone on a trip?
I think it's more the latter, but it's also
Uh-huh.
because it serves as a window on the sorts of stories which I'm going to be writing about.
Hmm.
Clearly PRs are going to be happy if you tag them or whatever, but experientially as well, I like to record that sort of stuff. So it's nice for me to have that kind of those kind of memories in another way as well. But it's not without its kind of its time constraints sometimes, and
Mm.
um, it's very rare that agencies would ever say we want a post on X, Y, or Z. But I'm always kind of mindful that just to throw some stuff in and throw them a bit of a bone as well and let them out there.
Sure.
To your point on the kind of the conflict, not really. I mean, I haven't chosen to write about a certain hotel brand because I've been working with them, and in fact, sometimes I'm also kind of mindful of the fact that optics and all that stuff, and
Mm.
maybe I'll just leave that completely alone.
Hmm.
But it's yeah, I don't have any problem sort of balancing that. And again, having been on the PR side myself for so many years, I think I've perhaps got a slightly more kind of easy approach to it, perhaps than some other writers. I don't know, but
And
it's nice.
what is the nature of your consulting work? Is it kind of general strategic, kind of high level strategic stuff, or are you writing press releases, or what's the kind of the scope?
Yeah, it's look, it's not that high level, let's be honest. It's
Right.
not, it's not kind of, C-suite strategic positioning. It's
Uh,
more nuts and bolts stuff, frankly.
mhm.
A lot of stuff I used to do back in the day. It's a lot of editing. So
Right.
working with hotel groups or brands or companies and saying, it could be finance companies, it could be, I've done stuff over the years for HSBC and MTR and
Okay.
you name it. So
So not
annual
even
reports.
restricted to the travel or
Oh,
food
no, no, God, no.
industries.
No,
Right.
no.
Hmm.
There's more money in other sectors.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Sure.
So,
Yeah.
I earn more editing a financial, mid-year statement for a company than I do
Got it.
for the
Right. That
hotel.
makes sense. Yeah. Well, the finance and law firms are probably the best fodder to go after then, aren't they?
Well,
If
exactly.
if they're
Yeah.
only there to pay the bills, then sure, why not?
Yeah, 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 yeah. No, it's very
Okay.
true.
So, favorite story to date?
Oh, good question. Um, I still go back to a story I did in Bhutan in 2017, which the country blew me away. But as part of the experience, we took a helicopter ride up to a place called Bayul, which translates as the Lost Valley. So it
Mm.
sounds, I mean, it is completely Nat Geo kind of content, and basically it was flown up to this extraordinary place, 10,000 feet up. The only way to get there otherwise is to walk in 4 days each way. So to land in this place and meet these people and have this experience was
I'm
just
going to cut you off, Chris, because we're going to get cut off by Zoom any minute now. But
okay.
thank you very much, mate.
Not to worry.